come on. I got something to say. Let me say it.
Okay, so More Than a Word. This was my Thanksgiving single. It's the first Thanksgiving single I've made so far. The song has a really interesting history. It started out as another song before COVID, and it had a very different chorus. And then I just kind of didn't do anything with it for a while because I didn't really like that chorus. I didn't really like how it sounded. So the second verse of the song, as well as the title and kind of the overall sentiment, I played with before that, and I had a version of it that existed before that I think I performed maybe once or twice and never recorded, and I never really liked it, and so I just kind of let it sit for a while, and then kind of recently, I guess maybe like a year ago or something, little less, I knew that I wanted to bring it back, and yeah, no, it was this year. I knew that I wanted to bring it back, and so I did. And I was in a band called Uncommon Denominator up at UCSC earlier this year. For my undergrad experience, I met some people and we had this band for a little bit. And we wrote a song called Disposable, which was kind of a song about dehumanization, and we performed it a few times at a few shows. And I wrote a rap verse for that song. That is actually one of my favorite verses I've ever written. It just came, like, I feel like when I write for a band, I come from a different place, and I've only written for a band a few times. I'm now in the middle of starting a new band, so that's exciting, but I don't get the chance to write for bands a lot. That's going to change hopefully now, but whenever I do, I find that I'm in a different headspace. So this verse came from a different place because I was kind of writing for, like, I wrote a verse for Disposable first. The band didn't like it. We discussed it. We kind of talked about where we're coming from. And then I wrote a new verse, and that was the verse that ended up being the final thing. And it went through some revisions rhythmically because I was writing for a band song. So I was kind of trying to fit my verse into the tempo of how we played the song and stuff like that, which is different from how I usually write. I usually write first, and then I kind of do everything. But in a band, it's different because you're kind of trying to fit it into everybody else and what everybody else is doing. And it fit really well with what the other people in the band had written. And so we performed that a little bit, and then the band kind of just disbanded. It didn't really happen anymore. But I still had the verse. And I have this idea now to bring More Than a Word back, which happened before Uncommon Denominator, but I knew that I wanted to bring More Than a Word back. So I decided to put it into More Than a Word. So the first verse of More Than a Word is actually the first verse of this other song that has existed. And there is a version on YouTube of Disposable with Uncommon Denominator, which will last forever, hopefully. That's up there, of us performing an ad in DizFest at UCSC in April of 2024. And that's a really cool recording. So there is a version of that song with the More Than a Word verse, but now that's kind of a fun artifact. And but that's the only version of Disposable that exists. Other than that, that song doesn't really exist. But now I'm using it in More Than a Word, and it was fun to do that because the first time I really took an already existing verse that I used in another song and put it into one of my songs. But you know, I'm writing for bands, and I do sometimes come across bands that I'm in for a little bit, and then if they don't happen anymore, and if I like what I wrote, then I try to use it in something else. That's something I'm going to start doing now. So yeah, that's a little bit of the content. Another verse I can talk about is the bridge, "You Fear My Interference." That came from Harry Potter. I was reading Half-Blood Prince, and I saw that line that Snape says to Draco, and I really liked that. And J.K. Rowling's actually my favorite author, and I've never written anything from her before or inspired by her. For some reason, this has never happened, so that's a first. And it was interesting, kind of metaphorically, because in the story, it's about Snape trying to help Draco and Draco refusing his help. But in the song, it's about people attempting to correct other people about misinformation and how the world doesn't really want that. So it's interesting how I kind of took this very specific storyline, but I made it about something very broad. And I think that's kind of the beauty of language, how you can use lines like that and kind of change the meaning. So that's really fun. The sentiment of the song is the idea of a slur, you know, the harmful impacts of a word. And it kind of centers around the word Redskin. There's kind of this unsaid implication throughout most of the song that I'm talking about Redskin until you get to the end where I actually am mentioning Redskin. So it kind of clarifies and I kind of close on, okay, I'm talking about Redskin. But before that, I'm just saying more than a word. And there's a really interesting effect there because what I'm trying to do with that is not only get people to think about, okay, is he talking about Redskin? Because the verses before that kind of slowly, like subtly hint to that. And then at the end, I'm saying Redskin. But I'm also, just by using the phrase more than a word by itself for most of the song, I'm making people think about, you know, what does that mean in a broad way? And, you know, there are so many racial slurs besides Redskin that are more than words that people just throw out there without really thinking about their harmful impact. So by using the phrase more than a word, I'm intentionally trying to make the audience think about what does that actually mean and trying to think about their own kind of interpretation of what word does that make them think of. And throughout the verses, I'm talking about dehumanization, genocide, historical context, and kind of hinting at different ways to kind of make people relate to this phrase. I'm also talking about my identity. I would say the first verse is the one from Disposables about dehumanization and the stripping of identity. And then the second verse is a lot more also about the stripping of identity, but kind of more my own personal identity and how that relates to my life. So I'm kind of starting abroad and then I'm bringing more and more personal kind of as it goes on until at the end, I'm talking very specifically about Redskin. But it's supposed to have this very interesting combination of, on one hand, I'm talking about one slur. On the other hand, I'm talking in a very broad way about dehumanization, the effects of words on people, and the fear of my interference line is purposely in the perspective of the listener, because most people will be very defensive when they're corrected about misinformation. And as judgmental as that sounds to say, that is the reality we're living in. So, but yeah, so there's a really fun little thing with the lyrics, and the evolution of the song is really fun. So yeah, I'm really proud of that.
To the depths of society, the tunnel where I must go.
Lastly, the mix and the instrumentation. So I wanted to create something kind of visceral and off-putting at the same time, but not too off-putting that people don't want to listen, but like kind of quirky, you know. My DIY staple kind of makes my songs sometimes sound very kind of interesting and like, okay, what's going on? Rough sometimes, you know. There's kind of different ways. Like, I have a very raw energy to all my songs, and I try to kind of stay with that no matter what I do, and that kind of happens automatically just from a DIY process. But I also purposely sometimes make decisions that feed that, and More Than a Word was a combination of both, because not only was it a DIY project, but I wanted to just, it was interesting because like I created the riff by I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had the song and I wanted to create the instrumentation from the song, which I also don't always do. Like right now I'm actually working on a lot of songs for my metal album where I'm actually kind of forming the song around the instruments, because I have ideas and I have the lyrics and stuff, but I don't know what the song's going to sound like until I get the people in to record it. But with More Than a Word, I had the song, I had the verses, I had everything kind of down, but I didn't have the instrumentation. So I just sat down on the piano one day and I was trying to figure something out, and I just came up with this really kind of visceral riff that just kind of repeats. And I don't play piano, but I'm good at just kind of riffing and coming up with random stuff. And I just came up with this line that kind of da 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 da, and I liked the kind of drone-y quality of that and how it just keeps going, and I could picture a lot of stuff over top of it. So the mix has a few different little things. It actually has a version of Why by Superman in there, hidden. That's a song I love. It's a song that I lecture on a lot. It's one of the signature songs of the indigenous rap movement. And I cover that song, and the Haya Wanda Hawainhe chorus is a really powerful kind of indigenous speaking chorus that's actually hidden in there, mixed in with Osi Kaiju, Hoko Hoko Tea now, Osi Kaiju, me playing with those words, which I've done in Indianize, the ceremonial words. What else is in there? There's also like a combination of lyrics, because I have the Fear My Interference line, which repeats, and I wanted that to be a loop. And then I have the other line, which is, you gotta specialize what you indigenize, you gotta specialize, don't individualize. My friend actually said, oh, you should write a song called Individualize, and I took that, that's where that comes from, and I thought, you know, no, I don't want to individualize, I want to de-individualize and bring back to community. That's where I stand right now in my life. So I decided to say, no, I'm going to do that. So that's where that line came from. But there's that mixed in there, and so those are kind of looped, as well as the Y thing and the Osikayu thing and the chanting, and there's kind of mixes happening and kind of just playing with it. But it was interesting because I purposely did some bad takes for the song, which I've never, you know, I mean, when you record, they always tell you never do bad takes of anything. But I did that. I actually did that for the song. There's a bad take of the don't individualize line that's in there, where I'm purposely just rapping it really badly and out of breath and just like completely just bad. And then there's a version of there's also a bad singing, humming in the background, and you can hear that. And I wanted to play with that, and I wanted to actually just, I don't know, because I liked the visceral kind of effect of the riff and then the drum part, and just kind of how that worked together. And I wanted to just kind of, because I thought about just doing a very clean vocal take of the humming, because basically how it started is I had the keyboard, but the keyboard by itself didn't really sound like enough, and I like the idea of having kind of vocals over top of that to once again just kind of, for me, the keyword I was going with in the mix is kind of visceral and reverb and that energy. And I don't think I actually have reverb on any actual take, but just the reverb effect, like the reverb energy kind of lets you think, okay, this is kind of going down a tunnel, you know, like where is this going? It's kind of this kind of spacey energy. So I decided with the keyboard, I wanted to have a vocal take there, so I decided to, I have one kind of version where I do a little bit of better singing, but then I have one take that's just like really bad singing that kind of feeds into the keyboard, and that's very intentional. And if someone listens, they can actually hear it, where kind of my notes kind of move in, you know, off-key ways, but I wanted to melt that into this kind of effect. And I don't know, I just like that, and just playing with that. And I don't know, I just kind of, you know, when I'm recording, I'm always so on it and thinking always about every take and stuff. And I don't know, sometimes it's fun to just sit down and just have no idea what's going to happen, which happens a lot actually when I'm recording some of my studio stuff, especially for the rap songs, where I actually have no clue what's going to happen. But I want to take that a step further and just really let myself space out on my desk. So some of those takes are just me like not even thinking about it at all, in any way. So you have the really bad, like purposely trying to kind of be out of it, which is kind of a fun concept to play in a mix, because you usually don't want to do that. But I don't know, I just wanted to do that to kind of also feed into this theme of kind of going against the system, which is kind of what the song's about in a general way. So I'm also kind of going against the system of what you're supposed to do when you record, by kind of making these like not so good takes, but mixing them in with something really powerful and visceral. So I don't know, I'm really proud of the mix, really proud of the song. But yeah, it's definitely my last single of the year. There may be an acoustic version coming out, I don't know yet, but please check out More Than a Word by RicoR out on all streaming platforms now. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I hope you guys really listen to the lyrics, because it's a very lyric-centric song, and hopefully kind of gives you guys something to think about. So thank you so much, and cheers.
Now Redskin is more than a word. Red